Have you ever found yourself randomly playing pool? Do you have a hard time figuring out where to put the racks? Or what to do with all the balls when you're done playing? Or even what to do with all those pesky pool cue sticks? Well, we've come up with a solution. Welcome to this DFI project. Today, we will be building two things: a pool cue table and a billiards supply storage box. The requirements for the pool cue table are: it must be the same style and height as the existing tables in the basement. It must hold up to 10 pool cue sticks. It needs to be wide enough to hold the billiards storage box we are building. The billiards storage box requirements are: it needs to be able to hold all of the billiards balls. It needs to hold both 8 and 9 ball racks. It needs to hold chalk, brushes, a small level, as well as some other supplies. And it also needs to be portable. Here's a rough sketch of the pool cue table. As you can see, it needs to be 24 inches tall by 22¼ inches wide by 17½ inches deep. Here's a rough sketch of the billiard supply storage box. It needs to be 7 inches tall by 14 inches wide by 14 inches deep. Here are some of the tools we used for this project: belt sander, brad nailer, clamps, countersink bit, Dremel tool, drill bits, hammer drill, 1½ inch hole saw, impact drill, jigsaw, miter saw, orbital sander, propane torch, rolling table saw stand, square, T-square, table saw, and finally our tape measure. The materials we used for these two projects are: 1 piece of poplar plywood, 2 feet by 4 feet by ½ inch, 2 2x4 by 8s, 3 1x4 by 8s, and some scrap we had, 1¼ inch construction screws, 2½ inch construction screws, brad nails, 80 grit belt sander sandpaper, 120 and 220 grit orbital sandpaper, 4 adjustable feet, 2 6-inch strap hinges, a sash lock, some braided rope, some felt, polyshade stain, quadruple zero steel wool, satin polyurethane, and wood filler. We'll go ahead and get right into the pool cue table build. We got out our miter saw and got to work. We started with the 4 legs, and then the 4 long braces, and then the 4 short braces. With the first of the wood cut, we moved on to assembling the legs. We started by laying out the legs and long braces, then clamped them together and squared them up. After that, we used our countersink bit to pre-drill the holes for the construction screws. With the holes pre-drilled, we drove in a 2.5-inch construction screw, then moved to the other side to do the same thing. With that done, we laid the legs down and finished drilling and securing the other 2 holes, 1 in each leg. We repeated the process for a second set of legs. After we put both sets of legs together, we put the short braces between the 2 leg sets and clamped them together. We then pre-drilled and used our construction screws to attach the leg sets to the 2 short braces. With the top part of the table legs assembled, we flipped it over and did the same thing to the bottom, using scrap 2x4s as spacers. Then clamp together and fasten as we did with the top part. Once secured, we flipped it one more time to make it easier to fasten the lower screws. And just like that, we have the base of our table. With the base now done, it was time to do the initial sanding. We used 80 grit sandpaper on our belt sander to knock down the worst of the rough 2x4s. Then we moved to the table and used the orbital sander. First, with 120 grit sandpaper, and then with 220 grit sandpaper. This left us with a nice, smooth base to work with. We decided it would be best to add the feet at this point. We used a 19/64 drill bit and then pushed in the adjustable feet. With the base done, we moved on to the top. We started by cutting our 1x4s to size. Then we centered the first board. Clamped it down. Pre-drilled with our countersink bit and secured it with 1.25-inch construction screws. With the first board down, we added the other boards and clamped them together. We marked the lines to ensure all the screws lined up. Then we pre-drilled and fastened the construction screws. We ended up with a pretty nice square when we were done. But oops! One of the holes we had to fill with wood filler because we screwed it up. With the top now secured, we moved on to the initial sanding of the top. Again, we used our belt sander with 80 grit sandpaper. After that, we moved on to drilling the holes for the pool cues. We started by making lines so that all the holes would line up. Then, we drilled the holes with our 1.5 inch hole saw. With all the holes drilled, it was time to sand again. After sanding, we cut the 2x4s and 1x4s to serve as our pool cue seats. We centered and clamped the 2x4s under the newly drilled holes and marked them so they could be ripped to size, and then we used a 1.5 inch drill bit to start the holes. We finished up the holes on the table, being careful to only extend the holes down about 1/2 inch. After the holes were drilled, we used our table saw to rip the 2x4s to the exact width needed to match the overhang at the top. In the meantime, Kara and the kids worked on the tabletop holes with the Dremel and sandpaper to make sure everything was smooth. Then we sanded the pool cue seats using 120 and then 220 grit sandpaper. With everything now smooth, we attached the seats to support 1x4 using 1.25 inch screws. And then attach the seat to the support using 2.5 inch screws. After the cue seats were on, we added the bottom shelf, cut from 1x4s, and secured with 1.25 inch screws lined up and countersunk. Then we ran the belt sander over the shelf to smooth it out, followed by more sanding with 120 and 220 grit. And there we have it, ready for the other side and on to the next step. With most of the construction now done, it was time to move on to burning the cue seats and the top. We started with the cue seats after removing them from the table. We use a propane torch to burn the wood. When both seats were done, we moved on to the top. But before that, it still needed its final sanding. First with 120, and then you guessed it, with 220. When the sanding was done, it was back to the propane torch. Beginning with the top, and then onto the underside of the top, and then the shelf. And there it is, ready for stain and polyurethane. With all the construction and burning done, the only thing left was to stain the legs and polyurethane the top, shelf, and cue seat. Throw in a quick steel wool job between polycoats, and it's done. Now a quick look at our billiard storage box. This is our billiard storage box. We forgot to take video and pictures of most of the construction, but I can tell you how it works. We started with a 2x4 piece of 1/2-inch poplar plywood, cut everything to size, and nailed it all together using our brad nailer. The wood quality that we got wasn't great, and it took a lot of finishing to get it looking good. We built the box to specifications, and then built an insert for the inside to hold the billiards balls. With the box built, we used a propane torch to burn the outside. After we burned the outside, we cut holes for the handles and screwed those in. We had to make our own screw holes since the side holes didn't work with the thickness of the plywood we used. When the outside was done, we stained the inside. After the stain, we added felt to the bottom and to the insert. We added hinges, a lock on the front, and a burned P into the top. We cut another shelf using the leftover plywood. Then we drilled 4 holes and threaded rope through, tied off the ends, and melted them to keep them in place. After adding some polyurethane to the outside, we finally end up with our finished product. And finally, we have our table and storage box all together and ready to go. As you can see, the bottom shelf provides a great place to place the storage shelf while you're playing.
This is Sergeant Screw-Up with your after-action report. This project went smoothly, with only one issue: the misdrilled hole in the top of the table. For that reason, I'm giving this project a 3 out of 5.
Ozzy gives this project 2 rolls, a fake clean himself, and a yawn, because he hates the sound of the billiards balls clacking together. But he thinks the table's alright. Well, that does it for this DFI project walkthrough. Thanks for watching. And as always, if you liked what you saw and want to stay up to date with everything we're doing here at DFI, don't forget to like and subscribe.